Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have one of my end of the year lists for you. Today I'm going to be doing my top 10 least favorite books of this year that I read. Of course, I read a bunch of books this year. I read over 60 books this year, but there were some that I was not quite into. Unfortunately, and most of the ones that I'm going to talk about in this list are not even books that I would necessarily say were bad. There's only one or two that I actually didn't like. The rest of them, to me, were just not that memorable or interesting, or just had, stuff in them that I didn't really like that really brought them down, or things like that. Most of these are not bad books, I would say. They're just the ones that were my least favorite of the year. And quick thing before I actually get into this list. First of all, no rereads. I don't believe I would have any rereads on this list, even if I were including them, but for these ranking videos for the end of the year, I don't include my rereads. I only include first-time reads, so no rereads. And also, no short stories. I don't consider them to be worthy of inclusion here just because they are so small compared to the rest of these. Comparing a 30-page short story or 20-page short story to, a 300, 400, 500 or more page novel is not really a fair comparison. So I don't include them. So now we've got those couple things out of the way so we can get into the list. I will be going from the book that I liked the most to the one that I liked the least. So number 10 is the book out of these that I would say is the best one, or the one that I liked the most, whereas number 1 is my least favorite book of the year. That's how this is going. So number 10 I have is Mask of Silver by Rosemary Jones. This is an Arkham horror novel. This is one of the only Arkham horror novels that I own. I only own 2 of them, and this is the only one that I have read so far. I was planning to read 2 of them this year, but I only got to this one. This one, again, is not a bad book by any means. I would say it's actually a pretty good book, but it is just one of the least favorites that I had, and there are reasons why it's on this list. This one, I think there was some good stuff to it for sure. I thought the overall plot was pretty interesting. There was some good horror elements to this book. The characters I thought were pretty interesting as well. Lots of varied characters, and I liked seeing them interact with one another. There was some interesting stuff going on, some mysteries that were interesting. But the main thing that brings this one down for me was the ending. I was not a big fan of the ending of this book. I felt like it was just a little anticlimactic. It didn't really hit the same way that I hoped it would. Wasn't really, I just didn't really care for the ending all that much. In addition to that, I feel like it was not terribly memorable. It was one of those books where there's actually quite a few of these on this list. This list is basically where all of the books that I think weren't terrible but weren't memorable go. Because this book, again, wasn't terrible. It had some good stuff to it, but I don't find it terribly memorable. Or anything like that. So that's also partially the reason why it's on this list. Number 9 goes to Lost Tribe of the Sith by John Jackson Miller. This is a Star Wars short story and novella collection. Now, this is somewhat cheating because this is a collection of short stories and novellas, but they are all connected. They all kind of have a few through lines in terms of plot, so I am including it because it also works as a sort of novel, even though it is multiple single short stories and things like that. But there are through line plots in all of these, so that's the main reason why I am actually including this one. Plus, I'm not, breaking up all the short stories individually. I'm including them collectively. This one is kind of similar to Mask of Silver in the sense that it's one that I think was pretty decent, but not that memorable. There were a few short stories in here that I did enjoy, particularly the ones later in the book. The last few I thought were pretty good, but the first few short stories in here I was not as much into. There was some interesting stuff going on with them, some cool world building and lore stuff in terms of what the Lost Tribe of the Sith is, and all that stuff. The history of them, seeing the history of this group of people across several thousand years was really cool. But overall, again, just not one that really stuck with me that I would consider all that memorable or really anything like that. Next one up at number 8 is one that I hate to put on here because it is a beloved fantasy book. And I think it's the only fantasy book on this list, actually, which is interesting. And that is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. This is the first book of the Earthsea cycle, which is a series that I do intend to continue at some point, even though I did not love this book. I do want to continue it and at least read the first few books. But this one, again, kind of similarly, was not terrible, but was not memorable, or something that, even as I was reading it, I read this in like one sitting, just in an evening, and as I was reading it, I just wasn't really into it. There were some good things in here. Again, this book was not necessarily bad or anything. I did like some stuff. I liked some of the world building stuff. I really enjoyed the magic system, which was kind of a word-based magic system. That sounds kind of weird because a lot of magic systems are word-based, but it's kind of unique in this book, or I think it was name-based or something like that, which is actually a really cool idea and something that I really enjoyed. And there was some good stuff in here overall, but again, not one that I find that memorable or very interesting. Maybe I'll reread it sometime if I ever do get back into this series, which I would like to do. So maybe I'll feel differently if I read it again. But it was not one that I really enjoyed a huge amount. It was just kind of okay. So, yeah. Next one on the list at number 7 is going to be Bionicle Chronicles, Makos Revenge. This is the third book in the Bionicle Chronicles series. I apologize, I can't remember the author name off the top of my head. But this is the third book in the first Bionicle series. I actually didn't really talk about this series on the channel. I read the first 3 books out of, I think, 5 or 6 that exist in the first Bionicle series anyway. There's a whole bunch of other ones, but I only read the first 2 books of the first series. The first 2 books I thought were pretty decent. This one didn't really do much for me. Again, not bad, just not very memorable or interesting, or there was really nothing about this one that grabbed me. I thought the premise of it was kind of interesting because it was about the Toa, who are kind of the main heroes, losing their powers, which was an interesting premise. But beyond that, there wasn't really anything in this one that really stuck with me. Or even as I was reading it, just wasn't that interesting. Didn't really have many strong feelings on it, really, one way or another. So that's why it's on this list. Next one up at number 6, and actually the rest of this list is all Star Wars books. I read a lot of Star Wars books this year, but unfortunately a lot of my least favorites this year were all Star Wars books. So the number 6 one that I'm going to talk about is actually one of the books in the New Jedi Order series, which is Balance Point. This is a weird one, because I gave this quite a positive review. Not an amazing review, but a pretty positive review. And it's one that even now, when I look back on it, I was like, yeah, that was a good book. But again, kind of similar to a lot of these other ones, I don't find it very memorable. And I feel like that is really what's weighing down a lot of these books. So I apologize if it's quite repetitive, but that's just the way it is. I feel like for me, even though, you know, this might have been a pretty decent book, for me, how memorable I think it is and how much I, in hindsight, remember about it and look back on it fondly, matters a little bit more than how I initially thought of it in terms of how good it was. You know, to me, like, the lasting impact is a big thing when it comes to books. And this one just didn't really have that. I did enjoy parts of this book. I enjoyed the characters, as always, in the series. The ending was pretty good, things like that. But this one, again, just didn't leave much of an impression on me. I don't really remember it. Even the stuff that I liked about it, that I just mentioned, the characters and the ending, I had to look back at my review of the book to remember those things, because I did not remember this book very much. So again, even though this wasn't necessarily a bad book, or even, I would say, a mediocre book, it was actually pretty decent. I think I gave it like a 7 or so out of 10. It's just one that didn't leave much of an impression on me, didn't find it very memorable, all that kind of stuff. So that's the reason it's on this list. My number 5 pick is going to be another Star Wars book, again, of course, which is The High Republic Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. This one is a little different from the other ones that I've mentioned so far, where I did have some good things to say about the other books. This one I don't really have anything good to say. In fact, I don't really have anything to say about this book. This is, out of all the books I read this year, this one and perhaps the next one I'm going to talk about were the most nothing kind of books for me. Didn't have anything really positive to say or think about this book, don't really have anything negative to say. It left pretty much no impression on me whatsoever. I don't remember anything about it. It just kind of came and went. And perhaps in my review I might have had more to say about it because of course it was fresh in my mind then. But now, looking back on it, I remember almost nothing about this book. I have no feelings on it whatsoever, and so I feel it's appropriate that is in the very middle of this list. Because the stuff higher than it, or lower than it, whatever you want to call that, the stuff that I've already talked about, I had some good thing to say about all of them, and the ones after this, I have some bad thing to say about them, I would say. But this one, just no real feelings on it. Wasn't really feeling strongly about it either way. So number 4, again, kind of similar feelings to Convergence, is going to be Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly. This is the 3rd book of the Callista trilogy. This one, I guess I misspoke a little bit when I was talking about Convergence, because I do have some good things to say about this book, and now that I think about it, a couple of the other ones that I'm going to talk about. But this one, for me, the only thing about it that I remember positively is that I think C-3PO was pretty funny in it. And that is pretty much it. Nothing else really stood out to me about this one. In fact, anything else I can think of is pretty negative. I didn't find the plot interesting, didn't find most of the characters all that engaging. I mean, they were probably pretty decent, but whatever. The writing style I did not like in either this book or the other Barbara Hambly book, which is coming up. Spoiler alert. Did not like the writing style of this book. I found it a little confusing, not that easy to digest or read, and all that stuff. Just was not really a fan of this book, but I did enjoy the 3PO sections, which makes it slightly higher than it might otherwise have been. Next, number 3 is, sadly, because of the author, Knight Errant by John Jackson Miller, who is an author that I really had high hopes for this book because of. That was probably very poor grammar, but whatever. I really enjoyed his book Kenobi, so I was really looking forward to this one. And this book, again, did almost nothing for me. I did enjoy the Sith characters. I thought they were kind of interesting, but otherwise nothing about this book was interesting to me. Not even the world building aspects were that engaging to me, despite this being an Old Republic book. I did not find the main protagonist very interesting. I didn't find any of the other characters, which I don't believe there were a whole lot of that I can remember. Didn't really find them interesting, didn't find the plot interesting. The only thing that I found memorable about this book was the villains, and even then, they were quite underdeveloped. I thought that the idea of the villains was interesting, but the villains themselves just didn't have enough meat to them to really be that interesting. So this one, again, was just kind of a dud for me. Didn't really have strong positive feelings about it, didn't even really have strong negative feelings about it, but again, kind of like Convergence, it was just kind of a very nothing book to me aside from the villains, and even then, I think they were not as well developed as they probably should have been. My number 2 spot goes to the other Barbara Hambly book that I had to talk about, which is Children of the Jedi. And I liked this one less because it did not have the positive aspect of C-3PO to it. I mean, I'm pretty sure he was present in this book, but he didn't stand out to me if that was the case. But it has all of the other negatives that Planet of Twilight had. Did not like the writing style. Did not find the plot very interesting. I found the initial setup kind of interesting, but it just lost me at some point, and I didn't find any of it really that interesting. Character stuff, didn't really find that memorable. But I think the big thing for me with this, along with Planet of Twilight, was the writing style. It would bounce kind of back and forth between present day and like flashbacks or dreams or visions or something like that all the time, and I could not really tell where that was happening. It made it very confusing. It's one thing that I think the middle book in this trilogy, Darksaber by Kevin J. Anderson, which I actually quite enjoyed, I think that handled it much better because it was much more clearly shown when that was happening. Whereas it wasn't really so much in this book or in the other one that I suddenly can't remember the name of, Planet of Twilight. The writing style just didn't work for me very well, and it was very confusing, and I did not care for it. My number one spot is the only book on this list that I would say I actively did not like. Which is weird because I gave this a relatively decent review when I first reviewed it, and that is The Courtship of Princess Leia by Dave Wolverton. Now, if you've seen my review of this book, which you may not have because I don't think it has a huge amount of views or anything, but I gave this book a decent review because there was actually some stuff in here that I did really like. Such as Dathomir. This is the first ever appearance of Dathomir, which is actually really interesting. I thought some of the character stuff was good, with Luke especially. So there was some good stuff in here. The thing I didn't like about this book was Han and Leia. And this actually is something that I actively really hate. And it's the reason this book is my number one. And the reason why, even though I gave it initially a decent review, it has fallen way down there for me as I have thought back on it. I felt like Leia and Han felt rather out of character in this book. I did not like the way they were written. I did not like the things they did. I did not feel like it was consistent with their character either in the movies or in the greater EU. It just really left a sour taste in my mouth, and it is, I would say, quite easily one of, if not my least favorite EU novel at the moment. Just, even though it did have that good stuff, and if I were being more objective, I guess, in the sense of actually looking at what was good and what was bad, or at least in my perspective, because obviously this was going to be, my opinion either way, but if I were basing it more on, looking at these books and ranking them based on how much good or bad I thought they had in them, this would not be this low on the list. But the personal feeling that I got from this was just so negative that it can't be anywhere but number one, because I just did not have positive feelings on this book as I look back on it. So despite the fact that I actually gave this a decent review when I first read it, it has not held up very well for me in hindsight. So that is the reason why it is my number one. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my picks. If you have read any of these, what did you think of them? Do you think they deserve to be on this list? Again, not everything on here I think is bad, so just because it's on this list doesn't mean I think it's a bad book. So do keep that in mind, of course. Even some of these I think were still pretty okay. But let me know your thoughts on that in the comments, and if you read any books this year that you particularly did not enjoy that much, let me know those in the comments as well. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.